So chapter four, KP is really going after kind of Western culture and the spending we have. And then the end of chapter four, chapter five, and chapter six, he's really going after the church, and he's going to really go for this idea of church inequality. And so he kind of ends chapter four with this, that he would go to these churches, and he says that often they would take up an offering and they would give him an offering, and then the pastor would invite him out with a board of elders, and they would spend more on that dinner out than was in the offering plate. And this totally frustrated him to the point, which I can get it. Like, let's say I'm asking you for money for widows and orphans, and you're like, yeah, here's $20. And then you're like, hey, come out to dinner with me. And oh, by the way, I'm going to now spend $250 on dinner. I would be so frustrated, and so was he. And what he saw was that the budgets of American churches did not match up with what the gospel calls them to. On a side note that's related, I don't know if you know this, but the average American family spends $3,365 a year on eating out. That comes out to be just under $300 a month. Now, why I bring that up is I talk to people about supporting missionaries, and to support a missionary overseas is about $30 to $40, maybe $50 a month, depending on what it is, but say $30 a month. And a lot of families will say, we do not have any money in our budget. We cannot afford to support a missionary. And the reality is they spend $300 a month eating out. One dinner out would be enough to support a missionary for a month's worth of work. So next time you go eat out, you shouldn't feel guilty, but also realize that one meal could have supported a missionary overseas for a whole month. If you're kind of curious, you could ask your parents about the last time you guys went out to eat. How much did they spend on eating out? And then just divide it by 30, and that's how many months it could have been supporting somebody overseas. And so on that chapter 5, he says this. He says, I was alarmed how misplaced the spiritual values of most Western believers are. They had absorbed the humanistic and materialistic values of the society around them. And then he would say it would be much more years, but I would start calling this out as sin. And this is where he probably gets the hardest. He says, where are your values? Are you trying to accumulate stuff and spend it on yourself? Or are you trying to advance the gospel? And he says, and then this is where he goes, I think, a little off the rails. He says, if you're not trying to advance the gospel with your money, you're in sin. That's harsh. What? And I'm going to pause and say, this is the one point that I would disagree with him. I don't think it's sin if I spend money on myself and I acquire good things. I do think it's a loss of eternal rewards, because if I spent it on kingdom things, those will last forever. If I'm just trying to get the new, sweet, cool, basketball shoes, well, those are going to not matter in eternity. And so I don't think it's sin, but I think it's irresponsible. I think we are given to be stewards of every dollar that God gives us. And so we should use that wisely to advance his kingdoms. But then he continues on, chapter 5, he says this, he goes, religion is a multi-billion-dollar business in the West. So I was like, well, how much money, is it's worth, right? Well, it turns out that in the last year or so, about $130 billion was given to churches. That's right, 130 billion with a B dollars was given to churches in the last year. So it is technically a multi-billion-dollar thing, but he does use this word business. And he says, man, if you look at the churches, they're actually businesses rather than ministry places. See, you have to understand his worldview. He's coming from where a church has one pastor that shepherds 50 people, and he's walking into these buildings worth millions of dollars with hundreds of staff for a smaller congregation. And so he's looking at this going, man, these are just run as businesses. And in one sense, his critique might be valid. I mean, do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think our churches are run more as a business or more as a ministry? And he uses this example. He says, the one observation, and actually this is the observation that hit me because I didn't even realize it until he called it out. He said, the saddest observation I can make about the religious airways, meaning like radio and TV, is that it's not designed for unbelievers. It's almost all just entertainment for the saints. I read that and I was like, no way. But just think about it. Any of the Christian radio stations, is their goal to convert people to Jesus, or is it to entertain people who are already Christians? Now, I listen to all of those right there, right? I listen to all of three of those stations. I think they're great. They all have their places. But the thing is it for believers or non-believers? In Phoenix, do you want to take a guess on how many radio stations there are, Christian radio stations in Phoenix? If you guess 10, you're right. In Arizona, there's 24 Christian radio stations. And in the United States, there's almost 50 TV networks that are Christians. Of those, which of them are only asking unbelievers to become Christians? And I have to agree with them here. Most of them are so that we as believers can be built up rather than reaching the unbelieving people. I don't know many non-Christians who say, man, I just love listening to Christian radio. Some of them do, and some of them come to faith. So there is a place for it. But is what we do at a church entertainment for us, or is it ministry to the broken, dying world around us? And he kind of goes after the church again and again in chapter 5. And it's hard to hear it, but I think he's got a lot of truths in his critiques. And he ends chapter 6 with a little bit of challenge. He says, as he was wrestling through this and he was figuring things out, he says, slowly a portion of our personal income and resources was sent to missionaries in India. And soon he couldn't buy anything without feeling guilty. And so they redid their finances in the light of eternity and in order to pursue and push forth the gospel. So I leave you with this challenge from him. Do you conform your life in the light of eternity? Meaning the money that you're making, the money that you're spending, are you spending it on yourself or for gospel causes? It's not that we're all supposed to wear rags and and just, smell and never shower, right? That would be gross. Please shower. Even if you're like at home, please shower, right? But what do we spend our money on? Where does our money go? Do we support missionaries at all, or is it all just spent on ourselves? Because when we die, when we enter eternity, what is spent on others and the gospel will last. But what is spent on ourselves and our own vain glory will burn up. And so he challenges us on this. He's like, hey, we need to reorganize our life in light of eternity. And so I challenge you with this. Would you look at your life? Would you maybe even challenge your family? Hey, how are we advancing the gospel with our finances? If we've got finances, could we make a change as a family and say, you know what? We as a family want to give up one meal eating out and give it to the missionaries. And so you have like a 1 meal a month. You say, you know what? Instead of going out, we're actually going to just have a missionary meal, and you all sit down and you have it together, knowing that you saved money going out, and you send that to a missionary overseas. Or even for yourself, would you say, you know what? Rather than going out and buying this coffee every day, I'm going to choose one day a month and I'm going to give that to missions. And when we get to the light of eternity, I think we'll be so grateful that we were born the wealthiest people in modern history, and we use that money well. Jesus challenges us that. He says, use your money well and advance the gospel. And we are the wealthiest people in the world. We have a responsibility to use our money for advancing the gospel. So that's chapters 1 through 6. Whew. Here we go. We got a little bit more to go with the next few chapters, but I hope you've been challenged and encouraged. And keep reading, hanging in there. We'll talk to you guys later. Bye.